Well, today's guest is Lavina Gully. She works for the Canadian Food Innovation Network, otherwise known as CFIN. She's the Regional Innovation Director for BC and Yukon. Lavina is a food scientist and product developer with almost 2 decades of experience helping food and beverage companies innovate.
Thank you so much, Lavina, for joining us. We're so excited for this conversation this morning and just to meet up and have this coffee date and get into all things CFIN and learn more about you and how you guys engage with industry.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be on your podcast. So CFIN is kind of what we call ourselves for short, Canadian Food Innovation Network, and we are a catalyst. We are a champion. We are a driver of all things related to innovation and technology in Canada's food industry, and why that's important and why people should care. If there's anything that we learned throughout the pandemic is that food is essential. Food touches our lives every single day. And it's a huge part of our economy as well. The food and beverage processing sector alone is actually Canada's largest manufacturing sector. But we also saw, through the pandemic that it can be fragile, really easily affected by supply chain, climate, weather, and things like that we saw locally. And it can also be a bit fragmented as well. It's an industry that's incredibly spread out across Canada, which is physically huge. So, at CFIN, we really believe that innovation and technology can really directly impact the industry and create a more resilient industry, create more economic growth, help Canada be more globally competitive, lead to a more sustainable industry, job creation, and all that. So that's sort of why CFIN was created and kind of why we exist. We exist as a not-for-profit organization, and we carry out our mission through kind of three main pillars or activities. The first is financial support for the development of technology. And I would say this is kind of how most people initially find us, is through our grant programs. So we fund research, development, and demonstration of food technology. And we ideally look for projects that are both transformative, but also transferable. So transformative meaning the solution or the innovation that's being developed addresses a problem that's widely felt by the food industry. And then transferable, meaning that once it is developed, it's something that can be adopted or used by industry. So a good example of that, for example, could be like packaging technology. If you ask any food company right now, or even, fast food restaurants, or even, grocery retailers, everyone is looking for more sustainable solutions for packaging. So we've helped to fund companies who are actually developing like new packaging films or new technologies. And, once that gets developed, it has that ripple effect because that tech can then be, handed off to industry and they can adopt it and help meet some of their goals. So to date, with our funding, we've approved around $17 million of funding. And if you go to our website, you can see a list of all the grant winners and see all the cool projects that they're working on. And then the second pillar of what we do, I would say, is driving awareness of food technology using content. So, content around what technology is available, how it's being used, what it means for industry. And sort of through that content, we're trying to encourage and grow this like culture of innovation within the food industry. So we've got a fantastic like comms team that put together great content and like explainer articles on topics like robotics and automation and, some really emerging stuff like cellular agriculture or like AI in food. So, and that aspect too, all of our staff, we all use our different social media channels and things like that to kind of aid in that process of communicating and just driving awareness of like how important technology is. And then the third pillar, and I think probably the one that is the most exciting and kind of the most useful to anyone involved or simply just interested in food, is our network, the network side of what we do. So we've created Canada's fastest growing, most engaged food community. It's completely free to join. We have around, I think, 4,500 members now. And, once you register, you get access to our online platform that we call Yodel. And here, our members can engage in discussions. They can find like partners and collaborators, find opportunities and events, opportunities to grow their business or events to go to, or really they can just simply discover like new ideas, something that they can, bring back some fresh perspective or ideas back to, their current job or whatever they're working on. So yeah, we really saw this need for having a centralized hub where we really make it easy for people to connect and kind of share ideas across the country. And with this platform, we're constantly adding new tools. We've just added like a resource finder in beta. There's a new career hub. There's a way to find additional funding. So yeah, super easy to use, free to join. It doesn't replace, a lot of the great regional associations and supports that exist. We always refer people to, start local. And if you want to connect, there's so much great local resources, but it kind of just supplements that because it helps you connect outside of your region.
So fascinating. I mean, there's those three pillars. I think that network one was what actually brought me to CFIN and Yodel, and I've been on the platform. But I'm very curious, like I'm sure those pillars about CFIN was one of the driving forces that brought you to CFIN. So if you could maybe share with our listeners how did you become a food scientist and sort of what are your passions and what brought you to
Yeah.
CFIN?
So prior to CFIN, I think I had spent most of my career working on the CPG side. So working for various like food brands as a product developer or an R&D. And I really loved working in R&D. I really loved like that hands-on aspect of the work, handling ingredients and being in the lab and taste testing and being out on the production floor and running trials, right? Like it's a very kind of like immersive. I love to roll up my sleeves and, get my hands on stuff.
Yeah.
And, obviously too, the satisfaction of seeing like your finished product, like, in a Costco or a Starbucks or like a Whole Foods, for example. And the other reason I loved R&D is because you really get to interact with virtually every other department in the company, right? So you're interacting with like marketing and sales and finance and obviously plant and operations. As my career progressed, found myself getting kind of further and further away from the lab and the production floor and kind of spending more time in like meetings or in the boardroom, talking about strategy. And as I spent more time with like marketing and sales and our executive team, I began to realize like just how important communication is, right? That communication skill, that ability to like sell your ideas, right? Even just internally within, your organization or like building relationships with other departments. By the way, I would say if there's any R&D people listening, I highly recommend, being able to go along with sales on some of their meetings. I was really fortunate to be able to tag along with some of our sales team to do like meetings with like Costco, for example, here in Burnaby or in Ottawa, or I had an opportunity to go down to like Bentonville to, pitch to like Walmart. So, so fascinating to be able to like kind of go along and really understand that storytelling side of things. And yeah, when I saw this kind of CFIN role, I saw it as an opportunity to kind of really grow some of those like communication, relationship building, like storytelling skills, but at the same time, leveraging my prior experience. So I'm on a team now of like regional innovation directors. So we're each kind of physically in different regions across Canada. We physically, work and live in different regions. And it's really a credit to our CEO, Dana McCauley, who had the vision of kind of putting together this team of like 5 different food professionals, each bringing a different area of expertise to the table. So mine is obviously, on the technical food science, product development side of things. So my knowledge area and my network encompasses everything from academia to the processing, manufacturers, operation, ingredients, suppliers. yeah, so this kind of ability to develop like new skills, leverage existing ones, plus this whole mandate of CFIN is one that I strongly believe in, right? I have huge love for our industry and for innovation. So yeah, it made it such an easy choice for me to kind of come and join CFIN. And I've made so many new connections, like meeting the both of you and getting to know people. So yeah, it's been a fantastic journey.
Wow. Well, it's been incredible. Just and thanks for sharing that and your background and how you got from point A to point B and the continuation, and the desire to constantly learn and grow and connect the dots. And I think it's just meeting you for the first time and learning about your background and how you're tying all these pieces together, I think it's just so inspiring, especially for those in the food industry that, you might have one path starting out, but then the opportunity to shift and grow and get into a different space that just opens up new possibilities and new opportunities, not just for yourself, but then also for others as you're starting to connect those dots. Yeah, that's so cool. And I have to say, I absolutely love the Yodel platform. It's been wonderful just to be engaging and to learn about opportunities in the Canadian ecosystem. There's just so much going on and so many cool opportunities and companies that we didn't realize existed until they pop up and they have a question, or they're like, I've got this event, or hey, check out this opportunity, and how quickly these links can be made between one person and the next or one company and the next. I think is just it's so wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad to see both of you super active on the platform and using it. And you're right, there, when you look at kind of food and food technology and the innovators that are within it, within Canada, it's a little bit underdeveloped.
Mhm.
And so having this platform where you can go out and discover like who's innovating in Canada, like what sorts of technologies are they working on, or simply
Hmm.
like what are they interested in and what topics are trending. It's so useful for that.
Big time. Yeah, no, it's been great to follow along. Yeah. So, just curious in your day to day. So there's a high level piece. There's the interacting with industry, sharing events, going to experiencing those events. What does a day in the life of Lavina Gully look like?
Great question. Yeah, I mean, I think it's, in terms of the work style, it's actually quite similar to when I was in R&D, which is, every day is different. You kind of don't know sometimes kind of what you're going to work on, and it's very spontaneous. That's what I loved about R&D. So super happy to be able to find kind of, a role where it's kind of similar. But I guess you could break up my day into kind of the external facing work that I do and then the internal facing work that I do. So, externally, it's largely, supporting our members. And, for example, if they find us through the grants, if they're interested in a grant application, I'm scouting for companies who are eligible, kind of looking at what kind of technology they do.
Hmm.
Is it something that fits one of the themes that we're working on? And then helping them kind of work through the application process. But support for our members can happen in many different ways. Maybe kind of an example would be helpful. I'm supporting a Canadian ingredient company right now who see an application for their ingredient in the food service sector. So they're looking for contacts and they're wanting to go in and like pitch their ingredient. But I think where CFIN and where working with us and the regional innovation directors really adds a lot of value is kind of helping them see the big picture. And in this case, helping them understand how does QSR or like a menu development chef create something new? Like what's the process?
Hmm.
And you know how do they work with their suppliers, for example? There's obviously some co-creation involved. There may be even multiple suppliers that they're working on. Maybe one does like the seasoning, and then one company does the sauce, and then you've got QSR who's kind of like putting together the product brief. Talking to them about how would they tweak their value proposition for this new type of client, what's important or what's going to be important in that decision making process. So kind of building that awareness a little bit about the fact that different segments in food are going to value different features in an ingredient, and how to ask this in a meeting and kind of what to ask, right? Like how important and how would they rank cost and use versus how an ingredient is labeled versus nutrition, because that's going to be different maybe for a CPG product versus a QSR product, talking to them about kind of what are some of the benchmarks in place for this type of ingredient, right? Thinking, and this is kind of where a lot of my previous R&D experience comes in handy, because I can kind of explain to them, how these decisions are going to be made for an ingredient. So yeah, working with your RIDs, it's much more than just, opening doors and making intros. We want to help businesses make the most of the introduction and make the most of those connections. So helping them develop a strong strategy. Like in this case, it's around, value proposition and understanding, their future customers, how those decisions are going to be made so that they can really be the most successful. I'm working with another ingredient company who have a fantastic ingredient, and they gave me some of their ingredients. Like I have it over here on my desk in a little bag. And if you guys worked in R&D, you know that your office and your lab very quickly gets filled up with little bags and boxes and samples and things like that, right? Because you're constantly being given samples. And so as I'm working to support this company and we're having discussions, we're talking about the importance of an application demo, or even having an application scientist join their team. And sometimes with a lot of these new companies or startups, you don't know what you don't know, right? They just know they have a technology, they have some customers, but there's so much about the industry or how decisions get made, they're not aware. And so that's where we can kind of come in and help them. So yeah, we talked about why it's important to not only just give somebody, a bag of your ingredient, but to kind of help the R&D team or help the marketing team understand what's possible and what it could look like by, looking at some demos or putting together some products that they can kind of look at and right away. So yeah, that was a really interesting conversation. And now I'm helping them actually find and hire someone for their team to kind of step into that role and hopefully develop some really good demos from them. So yeah, the support, it can really range from sometimes very transactional questions like, help me find, a new supplier of almonds. And for that kind of stuff, we always encourage them to also post on Yodel just for greater reach. But sometimes it's very interesting and kind of much more specific, casework, I would say. So yeah, that's kind of examples of how we support, our members. And then internally, the 5 of us RIDs, we get together pretty often to discuss our cases of the members that we're working with, and how can we offer them good connections across the country. My colleague in Quebec or Atlantic Canada might have a really good connection for them. We also take a lot of these, insights, because we're kind of on the front lines. We take a lot of these insights and bring them back to the CFIN team, who then use them to develop, new programs, new comms, new tools. We're working on Yodel 2.0 based on some of the feedback that we've, gained and collected. And yeah, and then, throughout the day in the evening, maybe I'll go out to an event, and meet folks like yourselves and see what's happening in the industry. I think, yeah, I've done a couple panels, recently, and do some additional networking and just kind of spread the word and go out and really interact in markets. So yeah, it's a really varied job, a lot of, different types of things that I get the opportunity to do.
That's so interesting that you have had that opportunity to juggle and collaborate with so many different partners throughout the space, not just in processing and manufacturing, but that ingredient B2B space. And for our listeners who may not know, because it's a fault that I do often, is I use a lot of industry acronyms. So I've been teaching lately and I keep pausing and saying, oh my gosh, I don't think they know what that means. So for our listeners, Lavina, if you could explain what QSR means.
You're right. Yeah, we do kind of just these the
I know, I
acronyms
do
just
it
roll
too.
off our tongue. But yeah, so QSR stands for quick serve restaurants. And so it's the term we use to describe like McDonald's or
Hmm.
like Tim Hortons or like, Wendy's and like these kinds of like restaurants where it's like fast food, I guess is what the consumers may refer to it as, but we call it like QSR is kind of the term, I guess, within industry.
I love it. Thank you. I do it at fault so
Yeah,
many
good
times
call.
and I just feel
I
bad.
do it too. We all do it. We're all guilty. We get into it, and and often, yeah, it definitely helps for sure. But I just love what you shared about being able to take those ingredients and place them into applications so that you're helping the end user or that maybe that business that you're pitching to just imagine what this could be. Not just imagine, but experience what that ingredient could do for them in that application.
Mhm.
And the proof is in the pudding, even as a jump off point, right? I think just that food piece where you get that whole sensory experience locked in, you taste it, you smell it, you have that whole experience, and it just takes that proposition to that next level.
Yeah, that's great. You were talking about your external and internal facing parts of your job, and I think you mentioned my favorite part was the sample collection and how you have, is that one of the ways that you stay on top of trends, or like what are some of sort of how do you stay on top of emerging food trends
Yeah.
besides the collecting?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the actual food product side of things, there's obviously lots of great events and trade shows.
Hmm.
Lara, I know you went recently to Expo West, and I saw
Hmm.
you guys recently at CHFA. So there's a lot of those shows where you can kind of see kind of what's trending more on the CPG side of things. And then I've become, because of, the types of technologies and innovations that we're looking to fund,
Hmm.
which can be more on the B2B side. I've been finding so many kind of entrepreneurs and kind of emerging technologies by going to like other types of events, like other than food. So
Mm.
there's a lot
Oh,
of kind of overlap with, say, like digital type events where you can find a lot of software solutions, or clean tech. Clean tech events is very big, here in Vancouver, and so you
Mm.
can find a lot of overlap, food tech and food technologies at some of those events. Earlier, earlier this week was Innovate West,
Mm.
kind of this sector agnostic kind of technology conference here downtown. And I try to go to a lot of these events, and sometimes I think, I'm not going to really find anything, or am I going to really find anything that's like food or food
Hmm.
technology? And I always do. Inevitably, I always do. So when I go to these like pitch events, like investor days, or like, something like Innovate West, I always find something relating to like a technology that is for the food industry or could
Mm.
be used in the food industry. So, there was like this kind of multi-round pitch event at Innovate West, and I was able to attend one of the rounds.
Hmm.
And, sure enough, like, the first person that pitched it was a technology around like air quality, and they had something that was going to clean air quality. And immediately I thought, hey, this could have applications in the food industry, like within a plant or something like that. And I see that quite often. And I've talked to a lot of entrepreneurs who have some sort of technology, and I go to them after and say, hey, have you ever thought about applying your technology somewhere in the food industry? And sometimes they never have. And it's just about kind of just putting that seed in their head about, you know, this is something that, could potentially have application in food.
Mm.
And so we get to kind of like almost seed that conversation with, innovators about, think about, how, your technology could be ported over to food. And then, what else did I see last week? So yeah, there was like that, air cleaning and air quality one. And then somebody came up with like seaweed packaging, which has direct implications into the
Ooh.
food industry. Somebody else had a technology where it monitors like foot traffic, like out on the street. So it's an automated kind of visual
Mm.
detection way of monitoring foot traffic. And as part of their pitch, they're saying, hey, we want to connect with QSR again. And, I went and I spoke to the founder afterwards saying like, hey, like, how did you, like, what do you think why do you think QSR would be interested? And, you said, yeah, as part of their market validation and research, they know that these companies are interested in identifying like conversion ratios, right? Like
Mm.
out of 1,000 people that walk down the street, how many of those have actually gone into their store, and, how
Oh
to
yeah.
it into sales. So it's like technology that has this direct application to food. And yeah, there's so many different ways to kind of find out kind of what's new and what's being developed. If you just kind of like broaden your scope behind, beyond like traditional, your food shows, there's a lot of cool like tech out there.
Oh, that's so cool. Oh my gosh, especially the foot traffic and the seaweed packaging. You just think about this, the conversion rate of how do I get those people in the store? What can really inspire them to come through and be a part of this restaurant and make that purchasing decision? That is so fascinating.
Yeah, the food industry, and I think that's a little bit part of our mandate as well, is to really expand the definition of what's considered
Mm.
innovation when food. I think
Yeah.
traditionally people think it's food innovation is just your new product
Mhm.
that you see out in the grocery store. Or sometimes they refer to it as like ag tech, like agri-tech, which is more technology that benefits like our farmer. But there's so much more to innovation that's related to the food and the food industry beyond just, the new products and, the farm level stuff. There's this kind of traditionally these innovators have been kind of on the periphery of the industry because they, supply into the industry, but they're really a critical part of the entire food value chain. And, we see that, yeah, from farm, but all including supply chain, including packaging, including food service, restaurant, hospitality, tech, anything that changes the way we consume food, package it, process it, buy it,
Mm.
anything like that is to us, food technology.
Wow. Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's so expanding. Well, that's incredible. And you mentioned, just as you're digging in and going to different events and also being part of panels. I understand you recently moderated a Women in Food Tech panel. What are some of the questions you get asked by future food scientists or those wanting to make the switch into the food industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of students, you have the basic question of like, will I be able to find a job?
Mm.
What are my job prospects, or what type of training, do I need? What are some of the areas that are growing? And there definitely are. So for example, like fermentation, we're seeing so much
Mhm.
growth right now with, yeah, like cellular agriculture or fermentation, or even things like, yeah, like mycelium and things like
Hmm.
that. And so
Mhm.
there's this huge need and kind of this new specialization emerging for that type of specialty. Similarly with like, yeah, robotics and automation, or even AI, right? Like somebody who's currently going through like a computer science degree, they may just have their eye on your traditional kind of FANG
Mm.
companies, and understanding that, hey, the food industry also has their eye on using, technologies like AI and Internet of Things, and, think about applying, some of your skills or expertise to that industry. Those opportunities are absolutely available. So yeah, I think most people just know of your traditional QA R&D pathways, right? And they
Mhm.
ask about those, but I like having a conversation with them and really kind of opening their eyes to other types of careers in food and food technology that are not, beyond just your traditional like R&D, QA, regulatory kind of jobs.
That's
Uh,
great. I think that's so inspiring. I just recently gave a presentation at BCID, kind of in that space where it's like you might start off on this one path, but really it's just like how can you explore more? How can you engage more and just look beyond what some of those traditional pathways could be and think about that next generation of the food industry and getting involved. Yeah.
my favorite word of this key word of this interview has been expansion. I think Lavina, you said expand innovation beyond just the traditional food. And I think for me, that's a great takeaway from just understanding a little bit more about CFIN. I think having the food there is kind of misleading because I'm like, oh, I when I think about innovation in food, it is those traditional concepts of ag and just food. But yeah, now I'm rethinking my strategy in visiting trade shows. Maybe I should. I was actually looking at that Innovate West, saw some post on there, and now I'm thinking, well, maybe this is how I can find other insight into food trends and technology, which
Yeah,
you never really
absolutely.
think about that when you're brought through the traditional, university food science degree. And I think that is one key aspect of R&D is because it's so super multidisciplinary and you're always working with a lot of cross-functional departments. So that's what I'm bringing in today to my my day today about expanding innovation. I love it. On that note, when if what would be on the idea of university and food science when you were starting out in food science, what would be an advice to your 20-year-old self if you were to, meet your 20-year-old self again?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's probably along the same lines as what you were just talking about. I think most of us, I know myself, I for sure thought of my career in that traditional like ladder sense, right? Like
Mm,
you're meant to kind of climb this ladder throughout your career, and where the key measures of success are these, progressive like titles and kind of moving up the ranks. And
mhm,
I think sometimes with that thinking, it can really, yeah, limit you to this kind of like, single track. So if I were to, yeah, talk to my 20-year-old self, I would say, don't think of your career so much as a ladder, but think of it as a bowl.
mm,
I think, fill your bowl with diversity and experience. I think I realize now it is much, you know, better to be well-rounded,
mhm.
throughout your career rather than kind of like to see a specific trajectory. So just kind of as you kind of navigate your career, think of it as a bowl that you just fill up and become more and more well-rounded.
Oh, that is so good. It's such a visual, right? Of all the different experiences that you pick up, all these tools that you put into your toolkit, all those conversations, and experiences that you have. What a cool way to look at it. Kind of switching gears a little bit as we roll into this. We're all about food and connection, and often those can happen around the dinner table. Lavina, can you share with us what your latest favorite Canadian restaurant is that you may have
Oh.
experienced?
Um, you know, my I gotta go back to, yeah, like I love pastry and dessert. That's my weakness. And my favorite kind of bakery, kind of bread pastry shop in the Vancouver area is Terra Breads. I think
Mm,
they are absolutely like one of my most favorite places to go. They've been around like since the mid 90s. I remember going there, in high school and getting their green olive loaf, and that's like one of my
mm.
favorite products. And then they've got a location out in Olympic Village, which is like just the most perfect cafe to go to. That's my absolute kind of like favorite local place to go to, and I've had the opportunity to meet the founder there, and she's amazing and puts so much heart into the types of products that they develop. And so, yeah, Terra Breads will always be really my recommendation to anyone visiting the city.
You in your role, you meet a lot of people that you yourself are helping or advising and coaching. But to turn that around, is there anyone that you want to give a shout out to or recognize who's helped you in your career journey?
Yeah, that's such a good question.
And it doesn't have to be
Where you're
one.
kind of approaching like graduation time here, like May, and
Mm-hmm.
it always makes me think back to when I was in school. So I guess I'd like to shout out to like all the profs and the TAs especially who made learning fun, at university. I don't think teachers get enough credit for what they do. And it wasn't until I I taught one course at BCIT for like
Oh.
one term, and I realized like, wow, this is really, really hard. So if there's maybe I'll shout out Ken at BCIT, who was the
Aw.
lab instructor
Awesome.
for the course I taught. So he really helped me through like my teaching experience, which was super, super challenging. But yeah, he really, he showed me that, yeah, you know what, hard stuff, take it head on. And when you have that support around you, and he was so supportive of me during my first experience. And yeah, shout out to Ken at BCIT.
What was the course that you taught?
It was like food processing, like the second year of food technology. So
Oh
it was
my.
food processing. Yeah, like we covered like cheese making and like dairy and like wine and brewing and
Oh,
sugar, and like it was a whole bunch of these
Oh,
different topics to teach. And then yeah, Ken did the hands-on lab where they got to actually make product.
that's great.
nice.
Yeah. Ken's a
Wow.
great, all I know about Ken is he's a great golfer. I golfed at the BCIT golf tournament. He was in our group. So shout out to BCIT
Yeah, big time.
for
And shout out to Ken.
shout
Yeah,
out
That's
to Ken.
wonderful.
how
Yeah,
do I get
teachers.
on
Oh
his
my gosh.
golfing team?
Yes, you should. BCIT, BCFT golf tournament coming up in the show notes.
We'll leave those details in the
Yes.
show notes. Don't worry. That's great. That is so great. I think it's always nice to be able to give a shout out. Okay, so we're moving into this next session. I'd love to leave this for the next listener. So, what question would you like to leave for our next interviewee on our podcast, Lavina?
So yesterday, one of my work colleagues, she posted something on her social media that I saw, and it was about kind of an event or organization in her region that she went to, and it was called, I'll shorten it, it's called Effed Up Nights. And I'd never heard of this organization or this kind of movement. So I looked into it, and it's about, I don't know, is it like the opposite of TED Talks or something? It's where you basically go and you share about all like the horrible mistakes that you've had in your life and things that you've totally effed up. And then, obviously what you learned from it and how you overcame it and things like that. And so if I want to leave a question for the next person, it'll be like, what has been your biggest F up and what did you learn from it?
Oh, that's a
Uh,
great question.
that is a great question, and it can be loaded. So, thank you for that. Oh my gosh,
Oh gosh.
that is awesome. Well, Laura, did you want to take that next
Oh,
one?
yes. One
Yeah, it's
other
all you.
traditional question that we asked our first interview guest is, do you have a favorite podcast or a podcaster that you like listening to?
For sure. I think one that I discovered recently, I think on a flight actually is where I started listening to it. It's called Wisdom from the Top.
Hmm.
And it's essentially a leadership podcast where all the guests are these like really successful CEOs of like Fortune 500 companies. And there's quite a few episodes, but I, of course, honed in on all the ones that are food related. So
Nice.
they've got like the CEO or the previous CEO of like Gatorade, of Campbell Soup, Pepsi, obviously Indra Nooyi, super famous
Mm,
woman CEO within the food
cool.
industry.
Mhm.
They've got like Yum Brands. The Purdue Farms episode is a really, really good
Mm.
one. So definitely if you're interested in kind of, what goes on at some of these, global food companies, these really huge brands, listen to Wisdom from the Top and then go straight to some of these like the food CEO episodes.
Oh,
I love it. I have a
yeah.
crush on the Pepsi CEO. She
I
is
do too.
awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
Show notes. We're gonna put in the show
Yes,
notes.
definitely. And that's going to be locked and loaded on my
Locked in.
next podcast listening schedule.
Yeah, so Lavina, I think we could keep chatting more about anything in food,
Everything.
everything. And thank you so much for taking time out of your day and having a little virtual chat with us. And I learned, yeah, I learned a lot more about CFIN, and which is great. And you're so fabulous to talk to. And yeah, I hope our listeners will join the Yodel platform. And yeah, maybe there's an emerging brand or ingredient company out there, and we'll be scouting for their application.
Yeah, everyone should join Yodel, or they can reach out to me, and I can tell them more about CFIN. But yeah, it's a really fantastic initiative, and yeah, so glad that you're both on there and that through this organization we got to meet and have this opportunity.
Thank you so much. This has been like a slice.
Now get out there and play.
Yeah.
Enjoy that sunshine in
Enjoy
Vancouver.
that sunshine. Oh, it's so nice.
It's so good.